supporting David Cameron at the EU referendum?
Well, I don't think I or anybody else in the SNP, the phrase supporting David Cameron wouldn't be in our lexicon. But being for Europe has been part of the SNP approach to things for many, many years, because Scotland is a European nation and the United Kingdom is a European state. And the idea of reversing that position is for the birds, or Nigel Farage, or somebody like that.
So it's linked to Scottish independence, the idea of the UK or an independent Scotland being part of the European Union?
Well, it's been for two reasons. I think when the SNP adopted the position way back in the 1980s, being a very pro-European party, they saw the ambit of the European Union as a place in which small nations, like Scotland, could play a very substantial role. And you were looking at nations like Ireland, for example, who become more independent from the UK as a result of being part of the European Union. I think there's a very close connection now, of course, between the Scottish independence debate and the Brexit debate that's happening now, because if we had the circumstance, and the polls actually point to this as a possibility, of Scotland voting pretty massively yes or in, and that's more or less certain, but the UK voting out, that is England dragging Scotland out of the European Union against our will, then I think the First Minister is right to say that that would make another referendum almost inevitable. I actually think it would happen relatively quickly, and I also think the answer this time would be yes in that circumstance.
I want to get more into that in a second, but have you been impressed how the European Union deals with crises in small countries like Greece, for instance? I mean, 250,000 on food banks, all of that happening, and how the European Commission and the European Union institutions dealt with it?
No, I haven't. I haven't been impressed by how they dealt with crisis in big countries like Spain either, for that matter. I think for those of us who believe in Europe, you have to not just argue about what Europe is now, but what Europe could be.
More of this changing it from the inside while being a member?
Well, you either say, look, we have to put forward a vision of what Europe should be doing, and let's work with our partners to try and establish that, or you say, let's fling up the monopoly board and stomp off in the huff. Now, I'm not for stomping off in the huff. I'm for trying to put our shoulder to the wheel to have a Europe which delivers real environmental imperatives, which takes an anti-austerity instead of a pro-austerity position,
and which shows austerity.
Yes, I'm for a Europe which does that, and I'm for a Europe which reacts with solidarity when confronted with a major continental crisis like the refugee crisis at the present moment. Now, I freely accept that is not the Europe we have at the present moment, but that's the Europe we could have. And it's that vision, a positive vision of the future of Europe, it's what will actually get people out of their houses into a polling station, not David Cameron saying, look, I'm making it less bad than the truly awful prospect it is now. That will impress no one apart from the occasional Eurosceptic.
So an independent Scotland, sovereign, but answerable to the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, or somehow the way it would be done would be differently from the inside, that wouldn't have Germany in an overpowering...
Well, you'd only be in that position if you're members of the Euro as currently constituted. I'm not in favour of membership of the Euro for a number of reasons which we could go into, but given I'm not in favour of that...
You used to be.
Yes, I was, but then so were many, many people. Unfortunately, the way the Euro developed didn't allow sufficient flexibility. It became an extension of pretty conservative economic policies instead of the hope for expansion, which could have been taken place if the Euro had been approached differently. You could argue the case that Germany and German attitudes have a dominating position within the Euro structures. It's not, incidentally, just Germany who argue for the rather conservative approach of the European Central Bank. That's been supported by a number of other countries as well. But then I'm not arguing for membership of the Euro, I'm arguing for membership of the European Union. And let's also suggest that Germany has, over the period of European Union, also been a positive influence in European Union development, for example, in the approach to a social Europe.
So you believe then that it is reformable, which is the standard response of a lot of people that say we should vote yes to staying in. There's nothing since Britain first entered the European Union that has made you think this is unreformable, and it's actually, I mean, to coin a word, to use a word, neoliberal, powerful banking institutions that are at the core of the European Commission?
Well, I don't actually accept that's been the history of the European Union. For example, let's go back to 1989, when Margaret Thatcher made her famous Brugge speech. I made a speech in Brugge just a couple of years ago, and I did it quite deliberately to kind of counterpoint the Thatcher speech. Now, if you go back and look at that speech, well, firstly, the remarkable thing about it, if a Tory MP made that now, they'd be regarded as on the Europhile wing of the party. But the second point about it was what it illustrated was the then Prime Minister's fear of the popularity of a number of things Europe was doing, particularly in the social sphere, and workers' protection, the protection of workers' rights, and a range of other things. And of course, she was right to identify these things as popular and progressive, which is why she was against them. So the idea that Europe and the construction of Europe has always been this neoliberal force is wrong. This has been a tendency because elections across the European Union have in recent years moved towards the right, and therefore the European Union has tended to reflect that ideology.
Because it is democratic. It's not lobbyists in Brussels at Michelin-starred restaurants telling people who are democratically elected, this is the way you got to go, otherwise you don't get support.
Oh, you've been unlike the lobbyists in Westminster, who obviously are totally absent and never tell members of Parliament which will look. All democratic political systems has its share of lobbyists, whether they're in Westminster or Brussels or Timbuktu. I'm quite sure there are a few lobbyists about, and it's up to democratic politicians to try and do their best for their constituents and sweep aside the blandishments of the lobbyists.
We'll have to find out about that from Malian politicians. You say you agree with your leader that there's going to probably have to be a Scottish referendum if Britain votes to leave the European Union. What about Philip Hammond saying there won't even be a European Union for maybe a sovereign Scotland to join if Britain leaves?
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what, trouble with Philip Hammond, you know, he's a traditional Eurosceptic who last year was tinkering with the idea of being part of the Out campaign. So he's got all the zeal of a convert as part of the In campaign. Now he's decided his bread is buttered on being part of the In campaign. Every utterance looks to me like an exaggeration. He's suffering from the zeal of the convert. I don't think, whatever Philip Hammond or indeed European commissioners say, I don't think a Brexit will be the end of the European Union. I think a Brexit will put the United Kingdom in an extraordinarily difficult position of trying to establish a place in the world. No doubt it's possible, but right at that moment, I think Scotland will say, well, you know, faced with a choice between London and Europe, we'll choose Europe.
And you're not convinced by arguments that actually it hampers Britain's larger, more international alliances that it could be making with BRICS countries because they are negotiated in Brussels rather than in London?
No, I think that's one of the weaker parts of the Brexit case. I mean, there is a reason why Eurosceptic politicians spend virtually their entire time hammering away at the Brussels Commission, idiots as Europe, playing up to the Eurosceptic press. And the reason is they've been totally unable to present a positive vision of a future of the United Kingdom out with the European Union. That's the biggest failing of their case. The biggest failing of David Cameron's case, the In case, as presented by the Prime Minister, is he's totally unable to present a positive vision of the United Kingdom within the European Union.
Is it in your interest for there to be Brexit because there will be a Scottish referendum?
That's an interesting question. I'm campaigning for In wholeheartedly because I think it's in the general... It's usually best in politics to try and do the right thing, as opposed to calculating that the wrong thing might come right for you. By and large...
You're not going to get a referendum otherwise.
Oh, well, I disagree with that. I think there will be another referendum in Scotland. I agree that the timing is more difficult to establish, but these great changes are always the difficult thing. As a start, Scotland is going to become an independent country. Most Scots believe that. A vast majority of Scots believe that's going to be the case. The First Minister, during the general election last year, when asked to name the circumstances in which there might be another early referendum, said, well, look, a change of material circumstances could be the position of Scotland voting in, England voting out, and us being dragged out of Europe. And what happened in the general election following that first ministerial declaration? The SNP won 56 out of 59 seats in Scotland. Not a bad mandate.
Alex Salmond, thank you.
Pleasure.